Hi there. If I was to ask you to suggest one particular way in which the church has changed over your lifetime, and I know that will be a longer timescale for some of us than for others, but if I was to ask you that question, how would you answer? Let me tell you what I think. I think the really big thing that has changed about the church in my lifetime is how it describes God. When I was a boy, it always seemed to me that God was an awfully stern and strict disciplinarian who would punish us for any wrong we'd done. The minister always seemed to be banging on about wrath and judgment. God was the Holy Willie of Burns's prayer. O thou wha in the heavens dost dwell, wha as it pleases best thyself sends into heaven and tend to hell, for thy glory, and no for ony good or ill they've done afore thee. A God of punishment, seemingly arbitrary punishment, a God of judgment. And the punishment was eternal damnation. You would burn in hell, go to the bad fire, as my granny used to say. But of course, there are two sides to this coin. One is how God forgives us. The other is how we forgive others. I once heard a story about two monks who were going on a pilgrimage. One was quite old, the other quite young, just a novice. They were travelling on foot, as this happened many, many years ago. Their journey took them to a place where they had to cross a river. There was a ford, but the water was quite deep. They would have had to wade across. On the bank of the river stood a young woman. Clearly she was hesitating, maybe a bit frightened of making this tricky crossing. The young monk said to her, "Jump on my back, I'll carry you over." And she did, and at the other side he set her down, and they went on their separate ways. The older monk, he was scandalized. "You should not have done that," he said. "A monk should not have physical contact with a woman in that way." And as they walked on, he kept this up, constantly fretting and nagging at the young monk as they travelled along. At first the young monk said nothing in reply, but eventually he'd had enough. "Look," he said to the older monk, "I set that woman down 2 days ago. Why are you still carrying her?" The old monk just couldn't forget what the young monk had done, and he couldn't forgive. Let's think about God's forgiveness. Do we need to be forgiven by God? I think it all depends on what you mean by that. Is forgiveness something God decides to do? Does he decide to forgive some people but not others? If so, how does God decide? Some people believe we can only be forgiven if we earnestly and truly confess our sins, believe in Jesus, and commit to living differently. But what do we do if we fail? Do we seek forgiveness again? If that's the case, then forgiveness is conditional. We can be forgiven only if what? Or are we already forgiven? Are we already accepted by God, loved by God, whether we know it or not? That would be pretty radical, wouldn't it? A theologian called Paul Tillich wrote about this in a book titled You Are Accepted. Its basic theme is that we are forgiven, accepted by God, in spite of all the things we can think of that separate us from God and from his love, mercy and grace. It says that God's acceptance of us is unconditional. Grace means that God's love is a given. This is forgiveness in spite of, acceptance in spite of our imperfections and the worst things we've done. And this is actually quite liberating. It frees us to change because we no longer have to live our lives preoccupied by measuring up. It frees us to forgive as we have been forgiven, and that actually changes everything. We are able to forgive our debtors, those who trespass against us, to put it another way, because we are already forgiven. Yet we often carry with us a burden of unforgiveness. There are people we just can't forgive no matter how much we try. So here's a question. I'm not going to ask you for an answer, and I'm not going to give you an answer. I just want you to think really hard about what the answer will be for you. Imagine you've gone to heaven. What will it mean in terms of what we've just been thinking about if the first person you meet is Jimmy Savile or Rosemary West or Peter Sutcliffe? When you pray, say, Father, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come. Give us each day our daily bread. Forgive us our sins, for we also forgive everyone who sins against us. And lead us not into temptation. May God bless you, and his Spirit lead you, this day and always. Bye for now.